Hello, guys. I'm on to the last part of my lecture on assessment, and this afternoon I will tackle the alternative assessment procedures. I have introduced to you the three learning domains. Last time, cognitive, affective, and psychomotor. These three domains, learning domains, are supposed to develop the individual holistically because education aims at the holistic development of an individual. It's not only the intellect or the mental aspect of the individual that is being developed in schools, but equally the affect and the psychomotor domains are supposed to be given equal attention. So education should therefore address the three learning domains, the cognitive, the affective, and psychomotor, for the total development of an individual. However, in most educational instances, in most schools, cognition is paid the most attention to the neglect of the affective and psychomotor learning domains. So, the individual is not holistically or totally developed in that case. Now let's look at what the RA 10533 policy statement state about it or declares about what schools should do. You are aware, of course, of RA 10533. That has already been introduced to you in probably some of your courses that you have taken up, and I also made mention about it in my earlier discussion. So the policy statement reads, "It is hereby declared the policy of the state that every graduate of basic education shall be an empowered individual." Take note of the highlighted concept, empowered individual, who has learned through a program that is rooted on sound educational principles and geared towards excellence. The foundation of learning throughout life, the competence to engage in work and be productive, the ability to coexist in fruitful harmony with local and global communities, the capability to engage in autonomous, creative, and critical thinking, and the capacity and willingness to transform others and oneself. If you will look at the highlighted concepts or words there, empowered individual, geared towards excellence, foundation of learning throughout life, competence to engage in work and be productive, ability to coexist in fruitful harmony with local and global communities, the capability to engage in autonomous, creative, and critical thinking, and the capacity and willingness to transform others and oneself. If you will look at this, if you will think thoughtfully about this, these are all about the affect side of our personality. Empowerment is a value, excellence is a value, learning throughout life or life learning is a value, competence to engage in work is a value, productivity is a value. All of these words on the affect. So, and of course, being productive, being able to engage in autonomous, creative, and critical thinking, etc. All of these also words into the psychomotor. Actually, we cannot really dissociate the affect side of our personality and the psychomotor side of our personality. We cannot totally isolate them from cognition, because to be able to do work, for example, with competence, we should be guided by our thoughts, what we have learned. So cognition is a major part of our being productive as individuals. To engage in creative critical thinking, autonomy, etc., we put ourselves into it, our feelings, our interests, our values into it, to become autonomous, creative, and critical thinkers. So we cannot really compartmentalize the affect side of our personality and the psychomotor side of our personality. We cannot compartmentalize these three domains. They come all together. And to become a totally developed, a holistically developed individual, these three must go together. Okay. The statement of policy in this RA 10533 defines to us what we need to do as teachers. You know, you're training to become teachers, and most of you are training to teach in the high school, senior high school, and some of you probably are already teaching in college. But this 10533 defines the basic, enhanced basic education, which probably most of you will go into when you get your license as teachers. So these are the things that we have to put into our mind when we step into the classroom. These are the characteristics of the children that we are going to graduate in the best basic education. Empowered individual, excellent individuals, lifelong learners, and so on and so forth. Okay, so in other words, the curriculum that we bring into the classroom must always address these important characteristics of an educated individual. Now, what is our role as teachers? We need to help develop individuals thinking in a productive rather than reproductive way, taking initiatives and being able to adapt oneself to a great variety of situations. These are the individuals that we are expected to turn out when we teach. Productive rather than reproductive in the way of behaving. What do we mean by productive rather than reproductive? You see, when we teach, especially when we take concepts, processes from books, we transmit them to our students in the classroom. We ask them to read chapter by chapter, and then we test them. What do we include in our test? What they have read. So in other words, what do we include in our tests? The lectures that we put across. During our tests, when all we get from them are the ones that we passed on to them, we are just asking them to reproduce what we have given to them. We are asking them to reproduce what they have read in the books. So we are asking them to be reproductive in that way, producing, reproducing what we have given them. That is not the way when we teach. When we teach, we should always bear in mind that these individuals that we will turn out, our schools will turn out, should be productive individuals. In other words, they have to be able to produce something good for themselves, for the community, for the country as a whole. Productive. There are many ways by which we can get our students to become productive rather than be reproductive. When, for example, we teach them something out of what we read or what we get from the book, okay, they have learned that. And we ask them to apply what they have learned in real life situation or improve on what they have learned from us. We are training them to become productive. So when they are able to do something out of what they have learned, then we are training them to become productive. But very importantly, we are training them to become citizens of the future, citizens, productive citizens of the 21st century. You know, Filipinos are, most, most of the Filipinos would like to get out of the country, work abroad, so that we see millions of Filipinos everywhere in the world. We are a country of overseas Filipino workers, migrant workers. So we find Filipinos everywhere, even in countries like the USA, in Alaska, in Greenland, in other words, in these countries that have very harsh, we find them in Africa, we find them in the Middle East, we find them else everywhere. But Filipinos, as we know, are very resilient individuals. We can adapt. That is one characteristic of Filipinos. You know? Wherever we find ourselves, we can adapt. But then, countries evolve as well. No? Countries become, some of them become so difficult to live in. So it's no longer, for example, in the US, it's no longer the what we know of as the land of honey, land of wealth, It's no longer that. Even in developed countries like the US, they are they're gripped with plenty of problems as we are here in the Philippines. So we should be able, when we think about going abroad, we should be able to think of the situations currently obtaining in these countries and see whether we're going to thrive there. There's so many harsh realities in these countries. Perhaps it's better that we just stay home. I don't know. We still think that in these countries we will find the wealth that we aspire for. Maybe we can think again. Perhaps we do not see the wealth in our country. Think again. Well, anyway, I was talking about overseas Filipino workers in the hope that they're going to find a better life out there, think again. Okay, I was digressing. Anyway, what I was about to say is that Filipinos are adaptable. We can adapt, but there is a limit to our adaptability. So we should be able to learn how to live even in very harsh situations. So what kind of children, what kind of individuals would thrive in whatever situations they find themselves in? So remember, I ask you, what are these 21st century skills that we must equip our students with for them to survive anywhere they find themselves in? Okay, this is the much touted about 4Cs, the most popular 21st century skills that we must equip our students with. Firstly, critical thinking. This is finding solutions to problems. You know, problems, even the same problems, for example, that we meet today, problems that we have solved today, is still the same problem tomorrow. Maybe the problem, the procedures, the manner by which we were able to solve the problem today may not work in solving the problems of tomorrow, the same problems of tomorrow. So it's not the solution that we should teach our students, but the process of solving a problem rather than the solution itself. Because the same problem we have today, the same problem that we will meet tomorrow, may require a different way of solving them. So I would like to say once again, it should be the process of solving a problem that must be taught our students, not the solution to the problem. Critical thinking. Next of the 4Cs is creativity. You know about being creative is thinking outside the box. Thinking outside the box. No? We can see things, we admire these things, and we try to copy. But the most important thing, Sana, is for us to be able to say, how else might I be able to improve on what I see? I see it's beautiful already, but there may be some ways by which I can still improve on that thing. Or better yet, I can develop something else. Taking, looking at a finished product, perhaps it's not only admiration that we have to feel about that product that we see, but think about how I might be able to do a similar one, not exactly similar, but an improved one out of this thing that I see. No? Now, that is being creative. When we see something beautiful, when we see something not so beautiful, we always think about how else might I improve on these things. And when we do that, we are being creative. Collaboration, working with others. One of the characteristics or one of the traits, one of the attributes that companies look for. When you apply, one of the things that they would always ask applicants is how well you can work with others. So Your experience in teamwork is a big thing to them. So collaboration, working with others, this should be one trait that we must develop in our students. And of course, it's very important, no matter where we find ourselves, it's very important. We are halfway probably to where we are going if we can communicate or we can talk to others. So communication would help us survive. Communication would help us live in harmony with others. So it's very important that we teach our students to communicate, not only in the form of language. There are many other ways of communicating, not simply in symbolic form like language. So all this you have learned in your cultural education. All right, so these are the forces, the most important and very popular 21st century skills. Let's name them again: critical thinking, creativity, collaboration, and communication. Okay, what other 21st century skills are there that we must equip our students with? Let's think of the IMT skills, the so-called IMT, short for information literacy, media literacy, and technology literacy. Information literacy refers to understanding facts, figures, statistics, and data. When we read newspapers, we are bombarded with what? With facts, figures, statistics. Do we understand them? We are usually, we hear about facts. What's the opposite of that? Falsehood. Are we able to discriminate between being told a lie and being told a fact? Can we discriminate between that? If we can, then we have a good and adequate information literacy. Can we distinguish between a fact and opinion? Then maybe we are good at this information literacy. In other words, we should be able to distinguish between falsehood and truth. Especially now that we are loaded with what they say. Ano nga yung sabi nila? Fake news. Loaded with fake news. All right, what will you believe in? You should be able to discriminate between what is true and what is false in this age of fake news. We find fake news anywhere, everywhere, including and especially in the media. So one of the literacies that we must develop in our students is media literacy, understanding the methods and outlets in which information is published. Okay, there is so much going on in what we call the social media. One thing is said about one person, another is said about one person. Who are we and what are we going to believe? Even when we do research, for example, ladies and gentlemen, when we are asked to do research, the most convenient way for you or for us is to Google the information. We don't bother anymore to look at printed materials, books, because it's more convenient for us to Google the information, to get the information online. Or, yes. We don't realize, or you don't realize, that for a book, for example, to get published, it goes through a process, a lengthy process, including being vetted by experts, authorities, edited, and before it gets published, because it's costly to publish, it passes through a lot of vetting or evaluation. So, in other words, for me, I would rather pick up a book. Well, I'm just saying this, no? It's my opinion. It's what I do. I do a lot of research, and I consult a lot of books rather than what I find online. I'm not saying that you should not go online in search for materials. But we should not forget that books are very good and very valid source of information. Okay, so publications. There are publications that, well, in education, there are publications that are authorities on this or that. In psychology, you have authorities on this and that. Okay, so that when you look for references, you have to look at the publisher. Kasi anybody, anybody with money can publish. No? But what about the process that is undertaken to get the book to be published? Okay, so media literacy. What channels are you a favorite of? What do you watch? Um, okay, bahala na kayo. I have my own um, pick of channels to watch. Time is very important. So I wouldn't waste my time watching this or that. I'm not going to name shows. No. Um, what I'm trying to say is you should be picky in your choice of what to watch, especially on TV. All right. Most importantly, we have to teach our students to be technologically literate. So, what is technology literacy? It's understanding the machines that make the information age possible. You know this better than I do. You are more, probably, between you and me, you are more technologically literate. Okay. So the IMT skills are very important, especially now that the pandemic is still with us. For how long, we don't know. Okay. So let's go into more 21st century skills. All right, this is the most important as far as I'm concerned. The role of the teachers is to develop life skills. What are these? These are skills pertaining to living our personal and, well, to most of us, to you, living our professional life. How do we live our life, personally and professionally? Okay, is there really just an aside, again, can we really dissociate our personal from professional life? Can we say, this is the way I live in my personal life, this is the way I live in my professional life? Is there really, can we really divorce our professional life from our personal life? That's for you to answer. Because as far as I'm concerned, my personal life goes into my professional life. I cannot divorce the two. Anyway, whether we live our personal life and professional life separately, we need skills we call life skills. What are these skills? Flexibility, you know that. We are able to adapt anywhere, everywhere we go. Leadership is very important. Initiative, productivity, and social skills. Again, you will note that all of these are traits that verge on the affect. Flexibility, leadership, initiative, productivity, social skills. As I said here, most of the 21st century skills verge on the affect and the psychomotor learning domains, the realization of which can hardly be measured using traditional means of assessment. What do I mean by this? We cannot test this flexibility, leadership, our sense of initiative, etc. We cannot test this using true or false, multiple choice. Maybe to a little extent we can, no? But the test of these life skills are into looking at this the way it is lived. So there are ways by which we can measure whether our students are teaching our students are living the attitudes, the behavior that we want to see in them. Okay, whether they have fully internalized the changes that we want to see in them. Productivity is one, and favorable social skills, initiative, whether they exercise leadership in their life, whether they are flexible, they are they are adaptable. No, these are not measurable through traditional ways of assessment. So what do we need? We need alternative forms of assessment. Okay, let me give us an example, a lesson on personal development. It's a senior high school subject, which reminds me, I hope you have downloaded a curriculum on the subject that you intend to teach. If it's English, at least you shall have downloaded one subject in English. If it's social science, one subject in social science. So personal development is one subject in the senior high school, and it's a core subject, as you know. Okay. In that curriculum that you have downloaded, you will see the columns there. There is the content is standard, the performance is standard, which we talked about last time, and the learning competence. These are already spelled out by DepEd. The DepEd has already made the curriculum for us. In our time, this was not done by the people upstairs. We had to do this. We had to make our own resource units, where we get our units, where we get our lesson plan. We had to do this. all of this on our own. But now it's made easy for you. It's facilitated already for us, for you, by the DepEd. So all of these are already defined for us, the content standard, the performance standard, the learning competency. Okay, I got this from the curriculum. The content standard, the content, the subject matter is knowing oneself. The content standard is the learners demonstrate an understanding of themselves during middle and late adolescence. Why? Because they are in the middle and some of them late adolescence. They are 18 years old, some are 19 years old who are enrolled in the senior high school. So they are in the middle and late adolescence, and they have to learn to know themselves. Not just what we tell them, but they should be the ones to know themselves. All right. Performance standards. The learner shall be able to conduct self-exploration. They should explore what is within them. And by doing this, they should not feel embarrassed in doing simple disclosure, in disclosing what they are, to people. So simple self-exploration and simple disclosure. This is what we would want to see in them when we teach them personal development. So one of the learning competencies is sharing their unique characteristics, habits, and experiences. So if I were to teach this, what will be my activity? Okay? By the way, let's look at this again. Demonstrate an understanding of themselves during middle and late adolescence. Perhaps what they know about themselves is what they read from books. They have not really explored the inner selves, their inner selves, because we really have not taught them how to do it. Okay, let's look at the performance standards. The learner shall be able to conduct self-exploration. Conduct. They will be doing their own self-exploration. And once that is done, they should be able to share the unique traits they have, to own up probably to the weaknesses that they have and the strengths that they have, their habits, good or bad, experiences, desirable or undesirable. Okay, this is what we would like to see them doing once they have done their self-exploration. Okay, so by the way, objectives and competencies, although they look similar, they are different, in fact, because objectives are more specific than competencies. So competencies probably we will see as a statement of general objectives or goals, and objectives, the specific ones we see in lesson plans. So I could put as my objective, by the way, the curriculum that is provided to you by DepEd, it's only up to a statement of competencies. Who will develop the objectives? It's the teacher who will develop the objectives. Yung day-to-day lesson natin na may objectives tayo ang mag-develop niyan. So, here are the two objectives. If I were to teach the lesson, here are the two objectives that I have formulated. First is to introduce oneself with pride and self-confidence in no more than 5 sentences. So just a very brief introduction. How are they going to do this? Maybe in written or oral. So they can choose. But if you want to hear them speak, of course, we would want them to say this orally. I want to hear them. So I would choose to have them do this orally, to introduce themselves briefly in no more than 5 sentences. And secondly, I would like them to use fun facts about themselves. Anong fun facts? No? Yung mga medyo quirky na characteristics nila. Yung mga medyo nakakatawang characteristics o hindi nakakatawa, something that make them unique individuals. All right. Like, anong paborito mo? Paborito ko ay ganito. Maybe nakakatawang paborito. Okay, so in other words, they should be able to maybe make fun of themselves because they have these unique characteristics that maybe talagang unique lang sa kanila, no? Okay, ang paborito kong pagkain ay ganito. Ang paborito kong damit ay ganito, etc. So, ang subject matter ko will be self-introduction. Ang reference will be how to introduce yourself in English with Lucy, galing sa YouTube. So, meron akong objective, may subject matter ako. Let's talk about, ano ba ito? Is this authentic teaching? What do we mean by authentic teaching? Ano? Is it something that would be useful to them in real life? Being able to introduce yourself in real life, is it useful? Of course, it's very useful. Where would it be useful? In many ways. Like during the orientation in classes, you're made to talk about yourself. When you're subjecting yourself to an interview, when you're applying for a job, you talk about yourself. Your prospective employer will not want you to talk lengthily about yourself. He probably would just want to hear a few facts about yourself. So you have to be very brief not to bore your prospective employer. Okay, so you should be prepared when you are trying to introduce yourself. You do not want to bore your listeners or your audience. So, maybe they can start preparing this by writing. And when they are done with the writing, they can edit, and reduce that writing to 5 sentences and deliver that orally, what they have written. Okay, so that's preparing for introducing yourself. Okay, back to, is that authentic? Of course it is, because we are preparing our students for real life exposure. Now, with this kind of subject matter and with the objectives that I have formulated, what kind of assessment do you think is required for this kind of lesson? Is it true or false, multiple choice, matching type? Of course not. No? The kind of assessment required is something that is observable, something that the child does, something that the child performs. No? So, the kind of assessment required of this subject matter is what we call alternative assessment. An authentic lesson would require authentic assessment, not the traditional assessment. Alright, clear po tayo. Now, this is what I would require you to do, as you will see later on. No? That's why I ask you to download a curriculum in the subject that you intend to teach later. Okay? Let's go now to what alternative assessments are. You've learned in traditional assessment that students select or identify bits and pieces of what was taught. You give it to them in the form of a lesson, you get it back in the form of a test. Now, this practice is inadequate to capture the totality of students' learning. That's why we are introduced to what we call alternative assessments. One of the alternative assessments is what we call authentic assessment, which is also called performance assessment by other books. So it's now extensively used to determine the impact of instructional programs on students' academic performance. Do you remember earlier in our lessons, assessment should be able to determine what the students can do with what they know. Can do. So what does that mean? Can perform with what they learned. So we are into what we call measuring their performance assessment. And if it has something to do with real life, then we say that we are using authentic assessment. In authentic assessment, students work on meaningful. It's something related to their life, no? Students work on meaningful, complex, relevant, open-ended learning activities, open-ended learning activities that are incorporated into the assessment process. The focus of attention is on significant tasks such as student products, exhibits, and or performances rather than on right or wrong answers to objective tests. Let me go back to that open, open-ended, open-ended learning activities. What does that mean? When we say open-ended, do we mean one single correct response here, or a diverse or a variety of responses? A variety of responses. So when you ask questions like, in how many ways can you fold this paper? In how many ways can you fold this paper? Okay, you hold a paper. In how many ways can you fold? How many ways will this pen work for you? In how many ways? So it's some kind of an open-ended question. No? How are you going to clean up the river, whatever river that's plugged with waste, solid waste? How are you going to clean that up? Is there a single answer to that? Of course not. So, when we ask students questions that is open to many answers, we call this kind of question divergent question. Questions predicated by phrases like, what if? Why? How? These sort of questions most likely are open-ended. And these are the questions that we would like to pose to our students. Why? Because we say we are training our students to become productive, to become creative, to become critical. When you ask questions like, what if? You're asking for alternatives to what probably they know already. What if Magellan did not come to the Philippines? What if the Spaniards did not come to the Philippines? What kind of country would we have been? All right, so you are asking them to project. You are asking them to think beyond what they know already. No? So let's try to practice. Let's ask our students more open-ended questions to hone their thinking, because we would like them to become thinking individuals. All right. When we give authentic lessons that call for authentic assessment, what do we expect the results of our teaching will be? The results of authentic assessment, or rather authentic learning, the results of these activities are authentic products, which should reveal the ability to apply the knowledge, to show that they can do something out of what they learned from you. Reveal their ability to apply the knowledge and skills they have learned to contextualize problems and real life settings. So the end point of our lessons must always be, how are they going to apply what they have learned from you when they go out and live their lives? Application. All right, so it's not the reproduction of what you have taught them, but the production, the doing of things, out of what they learned from you. Okay. Now, I made a mess of this. There are many varied assessment tools. I'm going to fix this, and you will receive your PDF with a better one. There are plenty of assessment tools that we can use to measure the application side of our teaching, the products of authentic teaching. And a few of these are the following. They can produce videos and performances. Oh, you can be amazed what high school students can do. They can even make beautiful films already. No? Exposed and motivated to do so, it's so amazing to see the products that they can do. I have seen this in my senior high school students in Piyuduran. Piyuduran yan, ha? They were able to make beautiful video recordings, of beautiful scenes, beautiful scenery in Piyuduran. And they have beautiful narration also of the scenes. So videos and performances could be products that you can ask your students to do. What else? Observation checklists are good tools for measuring the realization of objectives. Logs and journals. That's why probably when you were in high school, you were made to, or even in college, you were made to do journal entries, because this is where your teachers, if your teachers, of course, read them, this is where your teachers will see changes in yourselves, in accordance with what are stated in their objectives. What else can students create? Musical pieces. They can also do self-assessments in getting a well. I have plenty of self-assessments. Incidentally, one of the exercises that you will do And I'll send the exercise to you together with this, will be a self-assessment instrument. And after doing that, it's a 6-part self-assessment instrument. After doing that, you can present that in graphs because you will interpret it. So maybe you can present that in tables or graphs or whatever. And most importantly, you are going to write a reflection about the result of that self-assessment. One of the 2 exercises that I'm going to ask you to do for this part, na alternative assessment. Okay? And don't worry, it's very easy actually. It's not a test. I'm not giving you any more short quizzes. You got 3 already in the traditional assessment that we had in the previous lessons that we had. So wala na po akong long quiz. At saka ang finals nyo naman is shortened. I'm only giving you 30 items instead of 40. But many of you have said that you would want to have a retake of the midterm. Okay, you will have it. Okay, what else can students do that will show they have learned from you? They can do computer programs. It's amazing what the students can do, senior high school students can do. Pwede na talaga silang magtrabaho upon graduation. Okay. Peer evaluation could also be one of the assessment tools that we can use. Peer evaluation and graphic organizers are very good tools. And I'm going to introduce to you a few graphic organizers today. And artwork, of course. They can do posters, they can do paintings, and so on and so forth. So there are so many other alternative assessment tools that we can use to get into what's working in the heads of our students and in their hearts and what their hands can do. So the psychomotor and the affect side of the personality of the students can be inquired into using these assessment tools. By the way, this is not an exhaustive list. There are plenty more that can be added. Okay. Now, when we use any one of those tools that we have mentioned earlier as alternative assessment tools, they usually are accompanied by what we call rubrics. So authentic or performance assessments include the use of rubrics. What are rubrics? Rubrics are statements specifying criteria associated with different levels of proficiency, from low or no proficiency to high level of proficiency, for evaluating student performance. Rubrics assess process. If we teach the how, that's a process, no? So rubrics assess process. If students make projects, they can talk about projects in the form of, the procedures that they have undertaken to develop the project. So we use rubrics to assess process. We use rubrics to assess performance, like dance performance, dramatics, role-playing performance, etc. And we use rubrics to assess progress. Like, for example, a long-term project like research done in one semester or one whole year. It's both a process and the product is research. We do not just tell them, okay, you have done your proposal defense, your title defense, okay na yan, and then we will see what happened at the end of the term because you are going to present your ano? Dalawang points lang. Una at saka ang huli. Hindi po yan pag-check ng progress. So, how do we know that the students are doing their work on schedule? They're running on schedule. So we have to monitor what they are doing. No? So we have a progress checkup. So rubrics are necessary for checking the progress of long-term projects like, for example, research. No? So rubrics assess process, performance, and progress by delineating the various categories associated with assessment tasks and learning activities, the different levels of performance, and the indicators describing its level, and then rating student performance on products that show their learning. We cannot just say, okay, this project is worth 85, this project is worth 95. No, we cannot. No, that is not doing justice to the efforts exerted by the students if we just look up the skies and say this project is worth 95. Kung 95 or 85 for that matter, are we teachers prepared to answer these questions? Suppose we are asked by our students, why 95, not 100? What's lacking in my project? Why 85, not 95? What's wrong with my project? We should be able, and questions like this probably will not occur if we have rubrics to say, especially analytic rubrics, to say what's wrong, what's lacking in the product done. So that's the reason why we have to use rubrics. Now take note, rubrics can be student or teacher created scoring systems. Or I would even say it could be student together with the teacher, both creating the scoring system.
Mike yan.
All right. Why do we need to involve the students in creating the scoring system? Is there a reason for this? Of course there is. Remember, they are the ones who are doing the project, so they should be involved in assessing their products. What would they want to be graded in? Okay, so it's very good. It's a very good practice to talk about this in class. So that at the end, you have a teacher and student prepared or created scoring system. Happy siya, happy ka. When you both work on creating a scoring system or rubrics for such long-term projects as, for example, research or whatever, maybe film production, video production. Remember, students are spending so much when we ask them, for example, to do simple programming, simple programs, computer programs. So much money, effort, no? Sleepless nights. And then you will just look up the sky and say 85 or 80. Okay. We are doing injustice to our students in that way. Again, what's the best thing to do? Sit down together and form a rubric, teacher and student created scoring system. Happy ka, happy ang estudyante mo. Alright, there are two general kinds of rubrics. We have analytic and holistic rubrics. Ang analytic rubrics are used to assign points for responses on an assessment or work sample based on specific predetermined criteria. Those points are then added to determine an overall score indicating predetermined criteria. Like, like, for example, you ask them to write an essay. What is it that you would like to see in that essay? Perhaps you would like to see the organization. Perhaps you would like to see the substance. Perhaps you would like to see the mechanics, the style, etc. So all these traits are separately looked at, and separately provided scores, weights, and in the end, you sum them up. Okay? Analytic rubrics. Gusto mong makita ang mga gusto mong makita, traits, in that essay. Ganun din sa research. What is it that you would like to see? How is the introduction prepared? How is the theoretical conceptual framework evolved out of the literature that they have how do you call this, reviewed? You would like to see the methodology, the way the results are presented, and then the interpretation, the implications drawn out of the results, and you would like to see how the student concluded the study. All right, so in research, for example, well, many schools, I can cite a few, they don't, the panel members are supposed to use rubrics to rate a research. It's not just listening to somebody defend or during final oral defense and then put in the marks. It's looking into the details of the way the research has been made. Okay, analytic rubrics. Let's go to holistic rubrics. They are used to determine the quality of a student's response and rely on the product or performance rather than the actual process. So in other words, there are rubrics for an excellent, rubrics for what is excellent, defined well in terms of the looks of the product, the appearance of the product. No? Okay, excellent, what is excellent? Ito ang mga criteria for an excellent work. Superior work, ito. Satisfactory, less than satisfactory, unsatisfactory. Meron ng definition dyan. Anong mga nakikita dyan? So in other words, descriptors for each of these. Excellent work, superior, or very high, very, very satisfactory, fairly satisfactory, and then unsatisfactory. Clearly described. Hold on a minute. Okay. Students can also effectively use rubrics as a means of self-assessment. According to Ogle, when students create their own rubrics, it promotes empowerment. That's a great feeling. Empowerment. You have a power over the means by which you can create something beautiful. You can refine it. Sometimes when we ask students to do projects, some well-meant teachers would try to, in the process of looking at the progress of the work, they would critique already. All right, look, what do you think is wrong with this project? What do you think? Can you still change this bit and that? No? So in other words, there is guidance all throughout the development of the project until the student is able to submit a really, really refined work, in which case both you and the students are happy, fulfilled with what you receive from them and what they have done. So again, this sense of happiness, I think is the final reward for a beautifully done project where the student has put his whole heart in doing it, his whole mind in doing it, Okay, so in other words, a grade of 95 would be a very, very pleasing, pleasing mark for one who has done the best he could. So, kumbaga wala nang masasabi, sana ganito ang ginawa ko, sana ganito. Wala nang sana. The child has done the best he could. So with that, I think the sense of fulfillment is great. So I was reminded when I asked my students in history to make a timeline of historical events, landmark historical events during the Spanish period. And I asked the students, one of the part of the project assessment that I made is to ask the students how much grade they would put in the work, how much grade they would award to the thing that they have done. That's one of the things I asked them to do: grade themselves, self-assessment. How much are you willing? How much grade would you want to award to your work? Ngayon, 95. Because this. So in other words, they were able to justify that there's a shortage of 5 points. And what is this shortage about? The deficiency is about. So they are able to see that there is something lacking in this part of the project. Okay. That's self-assessment. The other one gave themselves very high level, very high grade. And then they were able to justify why. Ladies and gentlemen, the students more than you, more than the teacher, can really rate themselves so very, very accurately. You try that among your students. Ask them what grade they would put in. And they would be very honest with some deficiencies they have made. And because of these deficiencies, then they would only award themselves this much grade. You try that. It really works. I tell you. Okay. So ulitin ko po, this is very important. Students can also effectively use rubrics as a means of what? Self-assessment. And this gives them a sense of fulfillment. And it promotes empowerment. Now let's talk about self-assessment, also called self-evaluation. In self-assessment or self-evaluation, students are taught to assess or evaluate their behavior according to some standard or scale. So it's very important, ladies and gentlemen, that at the outset, they should be told what they will be evaluated upon. So it should be very clear to them so that they can put in weight on what you would like to see in the work. Ulit, repeat. It should be made clear at the outset what they are graded on. And in many cases, the students rate themselves along a 5-point continuum, with 1 as the lowest and 5 the highest. Okay, this is what the exercise I was telling you about. Your exercise in assessment 2, number 1 exercise. There are only 2 exercises I'm giving you, and you only have to be honest in filling this out. Not much brain work ang kailangan dito. You only have to be very candid in answering. No? The question there is, so kumbaga, there is no right and wrong response to this. Okay? Along with the PDF format of this lecture, you will also receive the parts, six-part metacognition self-assessment. You are going to score the self-assessment. And please, 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 don't send back to me the instrument. Ang kailangan ko lang, please take note of this. Please just score your exercise and send me only the interpretation of your score. By part. And your not fewer than, I'm sorry about this, I'll have to correct this, not fewer than 500 word reflection. Okay? Now, along with the exercise, you are also given an activity. I told you about the curriculum, did I not? Okay, so your activity in assessment 2, activity 1, your task will be to examine the DepEd K-12 Basic Education Curriculum Guide that you have downloaded. After examining it, you have to list down the learning competencies that would require authentic or performance assessment. Now, what is the product that should be returned to me? You are going to prepare a chart like you see here, no? Where at one column you have your competencies, and the other column opposite the competencies you will have to have your authentic or performance activity and assessment. Okay, falling back on the lesson on knowing oneself, the competency there is explain that knowing oneself can make a person accept his or her strengths and limitations and dealing with others better. Okay. So ano naman ang authentic or performance activity and assessment that could be prepared, that could be planned? to measure or assess the competency. It could be, ito nga na ibibigay ko sa inyo, completion of metacognitive exercise and scoring yourself. After that, graphing and interpreting the result and writing a reflection paper. If you will note, the assessment is alternative. In what form? Firstly, yung activity is the completion of the metacognitive exercise and scoring yourself, no? But what is more important, ito na yung produkto po ninyo, you should be able to graph. Why graph? Because it would be easier to interpret when your data are summarized and presented in an easily interpretable manner, like tables and graphs. Okay, so the graphing would help you in interpreting the result. And more importantly, after the result, what's the implication of that in your life or on your life? Ano ba ang magiging commitment mo after seeing that, well, you're not so strong in this aspect? What is your commitment? So you are going to do a reflection paper. Di naman napakahaba na reflection paper. Huwag naman napakahaba. Huwag niyo akong submitan ng napakahaba. Mahirap magbasa. Okay. Write what is in your heart. That's all what I'm going to ask from you. Okay. Write the sincerest commitment that you can write about. That commitment is not for me, it's for you. Commitment to yourself. Is this clear? Okay. Now listen. Your activity, there is no more long quizzes. So, you are rated here in the result, in the product that you're going to turn in. And what is the product? This chart. This 2-column chart. And maybe a 1-page reflection paper. Okay. Yung exercise, binigay ko earlier, answer sheet lang ang kailangan ko, ha? Hindi po ang, don't return to me. I have a copy of that. No? So don't return to me, please. The instrument. That's yours. That will form part of your collection of instruments. No? Okay. By the way, bakit ayaw kong i-return ninyo? Don't return anymore because what you return to me, piniprint ko. So, ang daming coupon ban ang nagagamit ko. If you return to me your test paper, for example, the test paper is 4-page, 5-page test paper. That's how many pages na bond paper? Di ba sabi ko sa inyo, sa instruction ko, talaga kayo ha, hindi ka nagbabasa. My instruction is what? Just send me the answer sheet. I found a very good paper, 2 of them actually. All exercises, activities in one paper, very well organized. Although I've not checked it, but I'm impressed by the way the answers were organized. 3 sheets of bond paper, very organized from exercise 1, long quizzes, exercises, and then activities, all in one go. Okay, I wish I would say receive the same manner of very well organized work, like you have exercise, activity, and then the how do you call this, the final exam. Put them together. in 3 sheets, put them together. Para hindi na ako naghahanap, hindi na ako So there are so many of you, more than 100 of you. Meron pang research, no? So, mahirap. Please just follow instruction, will you? Okay, activity. Now, ito ang favorite ko. The use of graphic organizers. Graphic organizers are effective for, as you say, organizing ideas and illustrating relationships. Graphic, kaya nga graphic. It's a visual representation of knowledge. As such, a graphic organizer can be used as both teaching and assessment tool. A student can use it as a learning strategy too. Maliwanag po, ano? So, graphic organizer can be used as a teaching or learning modality, as well as assessment tool. A graphic organizer is a way of structuring information, organizing information, of arranging important aspects of a concept or topic into pattern using labels. Graphic organizer can be used in any subject. I used a lot of that in social teaching history because history to a lot of students is a very boring subject. How do you get your students to learn about historical events? No? How can they appreciate that if they're bored? No? So you have to think about strategies and how to get them to be involved in the activity, and in the process of involvement, learn. Okay, so there are subjects that many students think boring, especially if you just ask some students to report about topics in history. So while some students are reporting, others are going out, others are making fun of others, etc. So the time is wasted. But if you get them to be involved in activities, no, and the product is very well defined at the end of the 45 minutes or 1 hour that they are engaged in the activity, they should be able to produce this and that, no, and they would be graded. How are they to be graded in the work, etc. It's very clear to them. You will see them very actively engaged in the activity. So one of the activities that I usually give them is graphic organizer. Kaya graphic organizers can promote active learning. Graphic organizers include timeline, 5W matrix, semantic, etc., etc. And I have produced a few of these for you. Okay, let's look at the timeline. Hypothetical lang po ito, no? This is how a timeline look. Like, I want to do biography of PRRD, Rodrigo Roa Duterte. Maybe I could start when he was born. So, this is just a snippet of his life, no? In 19 blank, because I don't know, he served in the judiciary. So if I were doing a timeline, I'm going to search for that. But I said you can start with when he was born. His schooling, you can include there. No. In 2016, he was elected president. 2019, he faced the COVID pandemic crisis, etc. And in 2016 to 2022, he is the sitting president of the Republic of the Philippines. No? If he managed to finish the term, let's hope he does. So anyway, this is how a timeline looks. Okay? You can make, as I was telling you about the example, I asked my students to make a timeline of the 330 so years of Spanish regime, from whenever they wanted, the presence of Spanish, and I asked them to mark the landmark events in the time that the Spaniards were here. They were able to do a magnificent job of that. Okay, maybe you would like to get them to write about a timeline on Ninoy Aquino, etc., of Jose Rizal, and so on and so forth. Di ba may subject tayo na Jose Rizal? It's part of the tertiary curriculum. At the end of the term, ano ang alam nila kay Jose Rizal? Maybe to summarize what they know, they can do a timeline. Okay? Timeline. Let's go to the next. What is called as the 5W matrix. What's that? Maybe you ask the students to read a short story and they can chart the who, what, when, where, and why of the short story, as a summary. Maybe an essay. You ask them to write an essay. To read an essay. Whatever. They can summarize the facts in this format. What we call the 5W matrix. Who, what, when, where, why. Okay, very easy, isn't it? Okay. Again, comparison, you can do a comparison chart. You're teaching about the ancient people, who were hunters and gatherers. You can ask them to differentiate the lifestyle of the hunters and the gatherers, the structure of their family, and so on and so forth. Whatever aspects you would like to see in their work, you see, summary, asking the students to summarize about what they read is not just making them an essay. Mahirap basahin ang essay, di ba? So if you ask them to do graphic organizer, it's easier for you as a teacher, and it's easier for you to see whether they understood important events in what they have read, important facts in what they have read, very, kumbaga, it's observable, so easy to see. um Never mind, I'll be digressing again. uh there are so many stories I could tell you about students in senior high school who can barely read, and when they make essays, it's so difficult to read. But when you ask them to make graphic organizers, they can submit to you very artistically prepared graphic organized. It's really fun to read what they have there, and to for them to be able to express themselves artistically. Okay. Anyway, Venn diagram is something that we used to be doing in mathematics, as you can see here. When you compare, ano ba ang subject matter dito? The frogs, amphibians, whatever, So, frogs ba ito? I think it is. Okay? An adult animal has 4 legs, can live in water, breathes through its lungs and skins. On the other hand, the tadpole, a baby animal, has no legs, must live in water, breathes through gills, whatever. And ang point of intersection, that's your Venn diagram, you can show the contrast and comparison. And what do they have in common? I do a lot of this in social studies. The use of Venn diagram, in comparing, for example, cities, in comparing people, people's way of life, in comparing the culture of certain, what do you call this, indigenous peoples. Okay, this is a very good way of summarizing landmark events in lives of people, heroes, for example. What do Rizal and Bonifacio have in common? You can put that here in the intersection side, intersection part of the Venn diagram. Where do they differ in their ideas? Okay? O sige. Venn diagram. Before they can do that, of course, they have to read the life of Rizal, they have to read the life of Bonifacio. So they are actively engaged, if you get them to do graphic organizers. Yan, semantic map. Beautiful ito. This is one of the things that I really love to get my students to do. For example, I ask them, for example, to describe the life of Agta of Albay. So firstly, you will have to identify themes. Like the themes could be, you talk about the settlement areas, where are they found, food supply, where do they get their food. You can talk about religion, you can talk about family structure. In other words, before you can ask the students to do this, they will have to read. If not read, they will have to. If there's sufficient reading materials about them, in the absence of reading materials, they can do interviews of people who know the Agpa, because, of course, it's difficult, for them to find them in their natural setting. So there are ways of finding information about them. That's part of their historical research. Okay, I just would like to show you this hypothetical example. If you want to write about the life of the Agta of Albay, then firstly, what is it that you're going to do? You're going to identify themes, like you see in the diagram. And then from these themes, you're going to identify significant facts about them. Okay? Semantic map is really a wonderful way of summarizing research work. Structured overview. Ayan. Your unit is food, and you are talking about nutrients. Alright? Ano ang mga carbohydrate rich foods, ano ang mga fats rich foods, ano ang mga protein rich foods, vitamins, minerals, etc. Instead of listing them in word tables, you can do this. It's easier to appreciate, and it's easier to study. In fact, this should be, graphic organizing should be one of the skills that we can teach our students when they make sense of the notes that they take down, if they take down notes, because many students don't. anymore. Oh, why are you not writing? I would ask. Ma'am, naka-record po. They're using their cell phones to record. O wala ka nang magagawa doon, ano? They're using their cell phones. But the thing is, what do they do when they reach home? Do they transcribe what they have recorded? Sasabihin ng, Ma'am, hindi na po kailangan. We just have to play and replay and replay. Fine. Yun ang nagagawa ng mga gadgets ngayon. Anyway, if they're doing fine recording and then replaying and replaying, for mastery of the concepts, etc., it's fine with me. The important thing is they should be able to do something out of what they have heard from you. So the important thing is the product. What have they learned? What have they done with what they have learned from you? That is the most important thing that you should see in your students. Okay, see that structured overview. Concept ladder. Ayan. You can use this in lessons that talks about hierarchy. Like the hierarchy, the one you're very familiar of, taxonomy of cognitive process, taxonomy of affective process. They come in that ladder form. Maslow's hierarchy of human needs. Okay, concept ladder. Flowchart. This is very familiar to you when you talk about cause and effect. Flowchart. Pwede rin dito yung cycles when you talk about water cycles, and so on. Okay. So cause, effect and cause, and result. Flowchart. Flowchart with multiple causes. Cause 1, cause 2, cause 3, result. In answer to a question. Can you see now the beauty of using graphic organizers, in summarizing ideas? Okay. Still on graphic organizers. Where in the lesson can you use graphic organizers? You can use it as an anticipatory set or motivation. You can use it in the lesson proper, and you can use it in evaluation. You can use it in any place, any part of the lesson. Just a little imagination on your part when you plan the lesson, sa lesson planning nyo. Saan mo ipapalabas ang saan mo gagamitin? Where are you going to use your graphic organizers? And in the end, you should be able to see that the students are also able to do graphing of their ideas and organizing this graph according to whatever they please them to do. Whatever it is. So, hindi po ako, when I teach, I ask them, I teach them all these kinds of graphic organizing structures, and then I ask them to choose from among these which one is more convenient for them to show their understanding of either the process or the concepts, relationships of concepts. So, as a teacher, I'm really not so I'm so I would call myself a more divergent type of. I would ask my students more open-ended work, rather than ask them a uniform way of doing things. It's more difficult, to assess, but it's fun to see how they can be very creative in organizing their thoughts. Okay, so much for the graphic organizers. Let's go to more tools in observing behavior, changes in behavior. Anecdotal recording should be one thing that all of you should know how to do, because you as teachers are expected to do anecdotal records or to keep anecdotal records. So anecdotal recording must be a skill that should be developed by all of us. What do we mean by anecdotal recording? Anecdotal recording is narrative, or anecdotal recording is typically used as an initial method for investigating academic, social, and behavioral expression of a student who is experiencing challenges in the classroom. Hindi lang sila ang nakaka-experience ng challenges. It's especially, sometimes even traumatic on the part of teachers when you have students whom you do not understand, the behavior of, So sometimes we even have to ask the help of others to handle or to manage the behavior of some students that we have. It's traumatic enough to have one, and you can just imagine if you have several of them inside the classroom. Anyway, let's talk more about narrative or anecdotal recording. Now, when we do recording, narrative recording or anecdotal recording, excuse me, all the actions and verbalizations yung lumalabas na salita sa kanila, all the actions and verbalizations of the target student are recorded for a predetermined length of time. When we say predetermined, meron po tayo na pinaplano na. Observation ko sa panahon ng recess. Observation ko at the start of classes. Observation ko at the exit. Observation. So in other words, pinaplano natin, ang time of observation and how long we are going to do our observation. Every 10 minutes. We have to plan this because we would want to see the pattern of the behavior so we can make sense of why he's doing this, what triggers the behavior, and so on and so forth. So when we do the recording, then of course we produce what we call an anecdotal record. An anecdotal record, also known as narrative log or continuous recording, is a narrative of the events that take place during the observation. What's its function? It helps one understand the academic context in which the student's behavior occurs and the environmental factors that influence the student behavior. So, hindi lang natin i-record yung behavior as we see it, but ano ang konteksto? Saan nangyari ito? Sa recess? Saan? Kailan? Sa recess? Saan? Sa cafeteria? Saan? So in other words, yung konteksto sa loob ng classroom, anong nangyari? Okay? Ano pa ang dapat nating maisulat doon? Ano ang uri ng behavior? So a narrative of the actual behavior of the student. Ano man yun, And of course, we have to talk about the environmental factors that influence the student behavior. So in other words, ano yung antecedent? Ano nangyari? Bakit ganon ang ginawa ng bata? No? Saan nagsimula? Ano ang simula? Ano ang nakatrigger noon? Nakalagay yan lahat sa ating log or narrative log. And I'll give you an example for this. Okay? But before the example, let's look at some suggestions on how to write anecdotal records. When we write the anecdotal records, don't forget the date, kailan ba yan? Time, and the length of observation. No? August 31, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, 10 minutes after the time, after the students entered the classroom. Okay? Very important. Describe the activities, the sign, individuals, and their relationships to the setting in which the observation occurred. We should also report in observable terms. So in other words, action verb kailangan natin dyan, ano? Report in observable terms all of the students' verbal and non-verbal behaviors, as well as the responses of others to these behaviors. If he hit somebody at the back, then say so. He hit Ruben twice at the back. Huwag dagdagan. Huwag sabihin, he hit Ruben so many times when you only saw 2 times. No? So be very objective in your observation and writing down the observation. Non-verbal, students verbal, okay. He swore at Maria. Maybe you can even write, or you can write what swear word was used. Non-verbal behaviors, okay. There are so many non-verbal behaviors, no? Na makikita mo sa mga bata ngayon, no? I'm not going to say what they are, no? But they're so, oh, okay, so anyway, you can describe them when you write. Okay. What were the responses? How did the others react to such behaviors of or misbehavior of the student? Now take note of this one. Avoid interpretation. So in other words, wala kang i-interpret. Just write what you saw. No interpretation, please. No judgment, please, when you write anecdotal records. And lastly, indicate the sequence and duration of events. No? Nag-away sa bakuran for 30 minutes, palitan ng suntok, palitan ng maanghang na salita. All right, say so. For how many minutes? 30 minutes. That's long enough. Na magkasakitan. Long enough for you to sana in-stop mo. May kasalanan ka na dyan kung hindi mo stop. In-stop 30 minutes of hitting each other. Hindi mo in-stop. May kasalanan ka na dyan. So anyway, so these are the things that we have to observe when we are writing anecdotal reports. Okay, now here is the example. I got this from, okay, a book. It's not a hypothetical example, but something that happened. No? Any class, hindi nga lang Filipino class, but an American class. Okay? The class begins the lesson. Ano po yon? Ang konteksto. No? So, it's in the classroom. The class begins the lesson with Mrs. McLeod asking the students various questions. Matthew calls out the answers to several questions. He's not called, but he calls out the answers. And Miss McLeod reminds him to raise his hand. As the lesson continues, Matthew touches another student, and the student swats his hand away. He then makes faces at Maria, sa mga nonverbal ito, who is sitting next to him. Maria laughs, reaction ni Maria, and he starts sticking her tongue out at Matthew. Matthew raises his hand to respond to a question but cannot remember what he wants to say when Mrs. McLeod calls on him, and he starts making up story and telling jokes. The class laughs and Miss McLeod tells Matthew to pay attention. As Mick McLeod begins to give directions for independent work, Matthew stares out the window. Mrs. McLeod asks him to stop and get to work. He works on the assignment for 2 minutes and then trips on his way to the waste paper basket. The class laughs, and Mrs. McLeod tells Matthew to return to his seat and get to work. When he reaches his desk, he begins to search for a book and makes a joke about himself. His classmates laugh, and Mrs. McLeod reminds Matthew to work on the assignment. At the end of the period, Mrs. McLeod collects the students' work, and notes that Matthew and many of his classmates have only completed a small part of the assignment. So as you can see, you have there the behavior very well described, the behavior of Matthew, the reaction of his classmates, the context in the classroom. You have here described the length of time, 2 minutes, and what else? Many other things that happened within the classroom. Who's the subject? Matthew. All right. So he's an interesting fellow to observe. So perhaps he is the subject of many more anecdotal records because he apparently is one who needs to be understood. No? He is a potential, shall we say, challenge to a teacher and to the class. So something has to be done with the behavior that he has been exhibiting inside the class. So hindi lang po isa na anecdotal recording should be had about Matthew, but several more. No? I just wanted to show you how anecdotal recording and how an anecdotal record must read. No? As you can see, none at all, from the part of Mrs. McLeod, no interpretation at all, no judgmental behavior on the part of Mrs. McLeod. Even the reactions of the students had not been reacted upon, had not been written about, but just simply described by Mrs. McLeod. This is the way we should write anecdotal records. No judgments made, no interpretations made about the what do we call this? The behavior of. So anecdotal record must form part of the evidences, especially of challenging students, students with challenging behavior inside the classroom. Okay. So ito na po yung mga details, Antecedent of Matthew's behavior. It happened during a teacher-directed activity. They were asked to do something, they were assigned to do something. And a listing of the behavior of Matthew: calling out answers, making extraneous comments, distracting others, leaving his work area, etc. And what were the consequences of Matthew's behavior? Ito. He received the teacher's attention. He received peer attention, receives reprimand, avoids unmotivating activity, and so on. And what was it for Matthew? Why did he behave that way? Huh? Maybe yan, to express the disappointment with instructional activity. I'm sorry about that typographical error. To express the disappointment with instructional activity and to receive attention from adults and peers. Okay, so if you will note, there is so much to read beyond the behavior. Beyond the what is this? The recording. Maybe somebody maybe this can be the recording can be turned into several of them recordings can be turned into the counselor for the counselor to make appropriate action, appropriate assistance to Matthew to correct his behavior. Maybe he's disappointed with the instructional activity. No? Maybe he just wanted attention from. How can how can one say this? If this is persistently done by Matthew, then maybe the patterns can tell something about Matthew as a person. No, that is a potential challenge to the teacher in the classroom.